We're with Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman to talk about a number of issues today. Thank you, Congresswoman, for speaking with Blue Jersey. Before we get into the issues, let me talk about your impressions as a freshman Congresswoman. You knew that when you were elected that you were going into a somewhat dysfunctional organization, but has anything there surprised you in your first almost year in Congress?
First, thanks for having me. I think that while I knew it was an organization that wasn't getting much done, I didn't have an appreciation of the depth and breadth and persistency of the dysfunction. So I didn't really understand the implications of a handful, 50 or so, ultra-conservative right-wing ideologues holding a whole Congress hostage. And I didn't understand the degree to which more moderate Republicans were scared of them.
What's your take on the debacle going on right now in the House leadership, the selection of the next speaker, and can the Democrats do anything to help?
Well, they're in the majority, and they get to generally choose who their leadership is going to be. I don't know if this is unprecedented because I just got here. I know in New Jersey legislature we had situations back in history where both parties kind of came together and came up with a compromise. But this doesn't seem to be a House that works together, Democrats and Republicans. So while Democrats have 180 some votes, we obviously could impact. But if you don't get a chance to vote on it, and if Republicans can't figure it out, they're not going to come out of the box unless they've got it the way they want it to be. So therefore, we don't really get to vote on anything. I just think poor Mr. Boehner is held hostage until they do.
Moving on to some issues, let's talk about a local issue first, and that is the fact that you see a lot in the press about Senators Menendez and Booker getting grants and attention for development for cities like Camden and Newark. But Trenton is also a city in distress. They recently lost their superintendent of schools. They recently lost their director of housing and development. Both went to more lucrative jobs. Is there anything that the federal government can do or is doing to really help Trenton bootstrap itself?
Well, this is the same problem we had when I was in the legislature. I try to impress upon the legislative body that Trenton isn't just an urban city. It is the capital of the state of New Jersey, and it is hurt by the amount of government and non-tax-paying entities on the infrastructure, whether it's human infrastructure or physical infrastructure. And so we would fight, the 15th legislative district would fight all the time to get Trenton to be a part of new laws with new tax credits, but there really wasn't the kind of effort on behalf of Trenton as there is on behalf of Camden and the Newark, North Jersey and South Jersey. I don't see anything happening in Congress that would particularly uplift the city of Trenton, the capital. But I think we can do those things. I mean, we can do those things through the reauthorization of this Elementary and Secondary Education Act, by making sure that certain types of resources and services go into areas that demographically are akin to Trenton. We can do so with economic development opportunities. We need a doggone infrastructure bill. An infrastructure bill would help Trenton tremendously. We need economic development as well as public safety money in the city of Trenton. And while Newark is such a large city, population-wise, and Camden is so strategically supported by very powerful people, this is the capital city, and we need to look at not only this Trenton, but the Trentons around the country. But the city of Trenton would also be in a heck of a better shape if it had more ratables, if it had more revenue generated from economic development. One of the mistakes I think that were made were, in affecting negatively the city of Trenton was when we allowed all the state office buildings to open up their own cafeterias, and it eliminated the traffic in the city of Trenton and negatively impacted the restaurant industry, which used to be very strong, and negatively impacted the retail industry that when I started working in state government was very strong, and Trenton was the go-to place to buy nice clothes and things of that nature. And I think that we need to find ways of encouraging people to get out more into the city. We need to have more opportunities. We need to have more high-quality stores with better, commercial merchandise of that nature. And people need to know that the city of Trenton is a relatively safe city.
Moving on to some national issues, you gave a very impassioned speech on the House floor on the TPP, and can you kind of summarize for our listeners the 2 or 3 biggest objections you have to President Obama's plan? I
came to the floor on behalf of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in a special order hour. And a couple of things, there are a lot of things that are problematic with the TPP. First of all, just the lack of knowledge that citizens have, that Congress even has, so all that's included. No protection against the manipulation of currency, interaction with countries whose employees, whose workers make cents on the dollars that will be competing with ours. No understanding of how we elevate our situation here for the working class as opposed to the multinational corporations who will do quite well with opening of markets, but then they go and hide their revenue stream. They put it offshore. They move jobs. That isn't strengthening our economy. And so that and environmental standards that we don't know what the responsibility will be of others in this engagement, and dealing with countries that have terrible records on human rights and civil rights. It seems that we're being dragged down as opposed to lifting up. And so if NAFTA is an illustration of whether or not this kind of trade agreement is good for middle-class families, working-class families, unions, manufacturing in New Jersey, in this country, then the answer is no. And we believe that we should have more information to make that decision.
You mentioned energy, and you and I spoke at Baldpate Mountain last week on a rally against the Penn East pipeline. The energy policy in this country is something that is also being stymied by the Republicans. What can be done, even incrementally, to help ensure that we have energy independence, we have the jobs, and we have the clean air and water?
So I find out in Congress, unlike any place else that I've been, that a no vote is almost as important as a yes vote. Now, I prefer to vote yes because we're moving forward. But by our collectively voting no, we sustain a president's veto. We stop some of the terrible things that the Republican-controlled Congress is trying to initiate. I mean, there are certain pet peeves that they have. They all seem to negatively impact quality of life for everyday people, whether or not it's women's rights or voting rights or environmental rights. It always seems that their movement is to support the very, very wealthy, the large multinational corporations, and to place blame on other places. I mean, they say things like, why are we going to increase our standards to reduce carbon, our footprint, when China isn't? Well, to help with China, this is the United States of America, and we have a responsibility to do the best that we can. And so in Congress, we are very united in the Democratic caucus to try to stop some of the terrible things that they're doing, to try to stop some of the diminution of impact of environmental regulatory issues and concerns. And it's very, very difficult. People don't realize that this is a very dangerous Congress, and they need to pay attention.
Another area that we seem to be moving backwards with this Congress is the failure to renew the Voting Rights Act. I read that in Alabama they're closing DMV offices in predominantly African American districts. How do we ensure people who can vote do get to vote?
Well, we need to do a better job of communicating with them, and not communicating just sort of these lofty policy issues, or not talking in, legalese and language of that nature, but making people understand this is what's happening to you. This is how it's negatively impacting you. So in Alabama, it is the DMVs. In someplace else, it is the identification cards. In someplace else, it's shutting down early voting. In another state, it's reducing access to places to vote, making it more inconvenient. Well, at the end of the day, that just doesn't affect poor people and minorities. It affects the majority of people. It affects people who are not representative of that 1% that keeps getting wealthier and stronger and better. At the same time, we're struggling as a middle and working class to survive, and it's very difficult on those who rely upon services that government should be providing, who are the most vulnerable. So people have got to understand that this isn't politics in its silliness form. This is politics at its most dangerous.
Another issue that is kind of both a federal and state issue is gun safety. As you know, guns can cross state lines pretty easily, so there's got to be some federal involvement there. Is there any hope that with this Congress we can make any sort of progress?
So with the two latest shootings, we got up and did our moment of silence, which is getting absolutely ridiculous and disrespectful, because then we sit down and do nothing. There are lots of legislative pieces that are in the hopper. I even have one that make it difficult to purchase ammunition online, that you actually will have to go to a dealer and pick up and pay for the ammunition. And that would also track the purchase of large amounts of ammunition and would notify law enforcement and the Attorney General. And so then there's these expanded background checks. We're looking at whether or not the Supreme Court, I think, is getting ready to take up this discussion again about access to certain types of military-grade weapons that have no purpose in life other than to kill people. There are many things that can be done and should be done, and we have to hear from people who are going to demand that we do something. And so some of these tragedies have happened in states and locales that are represented by some of the most conservative, right-wing people who aren't listening and think they're above it all, and for some reason think that the NRA has a greater hold on them. So we create this reality. It's almost self-fulfilling, and people across the country, everywhere this has happened. It can happen anywhere, anytime, any school, any place, any church, any temple, any mosque, any synagogue. It can happen, and people need to tell Congress that they're sick and tired of Congress not addressing this as a serious issue with legislation. And on a state level, the state legislative body, the Republicans, not the Democrats, have got to find the courage to stand up to this governor who's not even here enough in New Jersey to govern, let alone care about what happens in New Jersey. He's focused on some delusional run for president while we're sitting back here having these issues on and on in New Jersey, from economic issues, education issues, down to gun safety issues.
Tonight is the first Democratic presidential debate. Do you have a favorite?
I am 100% there with Hillary Clinton, and I'm going to tell you why. Hillary Clinton has a record. We know where she stands. Hillary Clinton knows how to get things done. Hillary Clinton understands both domestic and international issues. She is strong, she is substantive, she is smart, and she can get elected.